All right. So, welcome to Spirit Uncensored, our Sunday night live monthly event that generally occurs on the second Sunday of the month. We make some exceptions here and there. May will be an exception, but this event, this Sunday Night Live event, is dedicated to Multiracial History Month, which I did not know existed. I literally Googled. I thought, I wonder if there's such thing as Mixed Race History Month. If there's a National Popcorn Lovers Day, there has to be some sort of commemoration of the fact that there are mixed race people in the world. And discovered that Multiracial History Month is in March, but I don't know anything about the history. I don't know who decided that it was going to be in March. I don't know what year it started. All I know is that if you Google Multiracial History Month, you will see that all of the events commemorating it occur in March. And when I Googled it, as a contrast, when I Googled Multiracial History Month, I got 962 results. When I Googled Filipino American History Month, I got 86,000 results. So there are, I also Googled to see how many, if there's a difference between the amount of Filipino Americans and the amount of multiracial Americans. There are 3 million Filipino Americans as of 2010 and 9 million mixed race Americans as of 2010. So clearly, regardless of the fact that many of us may not know that Multiracial History Month exists and where it came from, the fact that we are underrepresented and underserved, Google really to me demonstrates those results. And in the civil rights movement, the civil rights revolution, that's what I like to call it, the civil rights revolution that began in May of 2020, Spirit Uncensored has been leading more of these kinds of cultural conversations because we recognize that Spirit Uncensored being this idea that spirit itself is uncensored, is not restricted to any one idea, any one concept. And so because of that, Spirit Uncensored is an interfaith organization. All faiths are welcome to participate. And we have these conversations about spirituality and culture because this is what it's about. God is present in these conversations. And the best way for each one of us to actively participate as being the change that we wish to see in the world, which Spirit Uncensored is all about, is creating these spaces for people to show up as divine beings, is what I like to say, that every person expresses their own experience of spirituality. Having these cultural conversations allows us to be able to create spaces for others to participate in these conversations in a way that is more enlightened and more educated. So that's the whole intent behind them. And I am wearing my Proud Owner of a Vagina t-shirt in honor of Women's History Month. And so Spirit Uncensored is, I also like to say that it is a spiritual playground. So everyone, every single service that we have is interactive. As I said, that we are recording, so if you don't want your face on camera, feel free to turn your camera off, but feel free to jump in at any time. Don't feel like because this is like some sort of official kind of event that if you have something to say, if you have a question, if someone says something that makes you feel a certain kind of way, feel free to speak up and put your voice into the room. If you feel more comfortable sharing your comments in the chat, you are more than welcome to do that as well. So Spirit Uncensored is a nonprofit organization. We operate from donations. I don't take a salary, and we have a very lean operations budget because we are a monthly virtual community, but it still costs money for us to advertise and have a bookkeeper and things like that. And so your donations are what allow us to exist. And my wife will be posting the donation link in the chat. I don't do like an official, now it's time for us to collect money and pray over the money. So at any point, during, before, after, feel free to make your donations, and we will greatly appreciate it and absolutely pray over your donations at another time. So now since speaking of prayer, I'm going to invite us to pray in. I invite you all to get comfortable in your spaces, wherever you are, bringing up your own idea and concept of what spirit is, whichever word that you use to define spirit, allow that to come forth for you. Recognizing that the diversity that we bring to our own understanding of the spiritual nature of the universe itself is absolutely right and perfect. And I know that each experience of diversity that we bring to this situation, this experience, the diversity of thought, the diversity of feeling, the diversity of beliefs, that each one of us is the right and perfect person to participate in this experience. And I know for a fact that this experience is blessed, that each person has decided to show up to expand their own understanding of either what it means to be mixed race or to understand the mixed race experience from a different place, knowing that the world is a better place because this experience is taking place, and that the world is a better place because each one of us has shown up to participate in it. And I am so grateful to know this, so grateful to speak this, so grateful for the shift that takes place in the universe because each one of us is bringing our own perfect energy to this experience. And I invite us to close this prayer with whatever word, whichever phrase that we are most comfortable with. I choose to close this prayer with the phrase, and so it is. Thank you. All right. So before we get into this, I want to make a book recommendation, which is something that I've never, ever done. But as I was saying at the very top of this, the mixed race experience is something that we don't really talk about all that much. And I've noticed that with the Meghan Markle interview that happened last week, there's been a lot more conversation about it. Kind of ironic that occurred during Multiracial History Month, and we still don't know that exists. But I think that it's valuable to provide some additional resources beyond this 1 hour of hearing my experience, Sydney's experience, Ashlee's experience, Harris' experience, anyone else who's mixed race, who's attending here and ready and open and willing to share their voices. I think it's important that there's an opportunity to have a deeper dive. So I want to provide book recommendations for 2 books that I've read by 2 mixed race women. One of them is Mariah Carey, my favorite, Mariah Carey. This book, The Meaning of Mariah Carey, where Mariah talks about her experience growing up mixed race. It's a really good book, and I'm not just saying this because I love Mariah. To me, the audiobook was the best experience of it because she kind of sings along during the whole thing, and it's like it's profound. There are things like songs that she seems like she recorded specifically for the audiobook, and you see hear the emotion in her voice. It's a really moving and powerful book. Elaine Welteroff, who is best known as the editor-in-chief of Teen Vogue. Right before Teen Vogue shut down altogether, they basically gave her an opportunity. They were moving online, and I think she was like 25, gave her this opportunity to serve as editor-in-chief because no one really knew how to use the websites anyway at Condé Nast, and she shares a story about how she ended up in that position. But she talks a lot about her mixed race experience in her book as well. So those are 2 recommendations that I had off of the top of my head. So now I want to get into introducing our panelists because I have certainly done enough talking. I'll go in the order of who I see on my screen. So I'm going to start with Sydney, and what I'll share about each panelist is what inspired me to ask them to lead and be a part of this conversation. Sydney and I know each other from teen group. I was actually a mentor of her teen group. So she was one of my teens. And I've noticed on Facebook over the course of the last year, since the civil rights revolution began in May of 2020, that she's been really vocal about her experience as a mixed race woman in Temecula. So I invited her on to share that. And she seems like she has a lot of opinions about that. And because I really respect her as a woman and as a young adult, I really just wanted to invite her to participate in this conversation. Sydney, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us about what inspired you to join us in this conversation?
Hello, thank you, Karen. Yeah, so I feel like when you asked me, it was so funny, and I think it was perfect alignment because I was like, I want to get into more of a mixed community and like talking to more people that are like me. They don't have to look like me, but just that understand what that's like. And then you asked me, and I was like, wow, okay, here we are. But I'm very honored to be here, honestly, because I feel like over the course of the past year, I've discovered so many things about myself, about other people, about my family. So I'm just really excited to be here and get to share with other people and listen to what other people have experienced.
Amazing. Thank you, Sydney.
Wow.
Next person I'm looking at is Ashlee. Ashlee and I work together at CAA at Creative Artist Agency, and she's still there. I left a few years ago, and we met on a bus ride, I think, to some sort of women's event. CAA during, I say this civil rights revolution started in May, but I think in reality it started back during the women's movement 4 years ago, and it's a whole thing. it's probably no coincidence that there's a women's movement, a conversation about race, and I think it's expanding beyond. So in the same way that the civil rights movement and the women's movement kind of coalesced at the same time, I think we're going through that right now. And Ashlee and I met on the bus ride because CAA decided it was some sort of thing where they were honoring women and had a day where we didn't have to go to work, but didn't really close the office. So what they decided that they would do, like the morning of, we got an email that said, you get to go on a bus ride to this thing if you're a woman and if you want to, and if your boss lets you, pretty much. And my boss was a super feminist, so she let me on. And Ashlee and I connected, got to know each other. We decided to meet up for drinks later and get to know each other more. We also met Kerry Washington together and took a picture with her. So that was a big moment for all of us. Ashlee, did you want to add anything to your introduction and share about what brings you here today?
That was beautiful. You're bringing all the memories back. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I work in cultural business strategy at CAA, and thank you for inviting me. And of course, when you're invited to something like this, you have to grapple with the dynamics that you've been experiencing throughout your life. And I'm Indian and Black, and especially throughout the course of this year, I have been unpacking a lot of the anti-Blackness that I felt on the Indian side, and just like what that means in the greater context of the movement that we're currently seeing. So thank you so much for inviting me and forcing that reflection. And I'm really excited to get into this conversation.
Thank you for saying yes. I appreciate it. And last we have Harris. Harris and I met at teen camp a couple years ago. It was a winter teen camp, and Harris was a leader in this teen camp. And the teen camp took place over the Martin Luther King holiday, but at this teen camp, nobody mentioned Martin Luther King. And I learned by asking people who've been in this teen camp consistently, do they ever mention Martin Luther King Jr. during these things? It's a spirituality camp, doesn't ever come up. And Harris is shaking his head and laughing because it doesn't. So we were one of the few, there were, it was something like 300 people there, and Harris and I were like one of 4 Black folks in the whole place. And so it was that whole uncomfortable, do you just talk to the other Black person just because? And because I was there as a mentor and Harris was there as a teen, I didn't know how that can go. And Harris and I ended up having that uncomfortable conversation of, should we talk to each other because we're Black? And shared in that conversation, we learned about each other, that we were mixed race, and connected again at a retreat. It was a New Thought retreat for young adults. And this is when Harris and I learned that we lived 4 blocks away from each other. So during the pandemic, we decided that we would have these backyard/front yard, depending on my wife's mood. We started off in the backyard, but we were too loud. And so now we're in the front yard where we meet on Thursdays and talk about what's happening in the world. And it's been, as you said, Sydney, this concept of having a community of mixed race people, like, it doesn't really exist. Like, I kind of told y'all individually. So for Harris and I to have these Thursday nights to really unpack what's happening both in our lives and in the world has been super therapeutic for me, and I am super grateful for that. Harris, is there anything that you'd like to add to your introduction and explain why you were inspired to say yes to being a part of our panel?
Okay, so one thing I want to say is that I'm glad that I think that it's hilarious, but it's definitely an exaggeration. There weren't 300 people at that camp, and we weren't just 4 Black people. It's okay. I don't know if Sydney was there, but there's definitely, no, you weren't at that winter camp?
She was not.
What year was that?
It was like 2018, I think.
18 and 19, yeah. No, okay. Well then, -1 Black person from my memory. I really said yes because like other people have said, there's not really a community that I'm a part of that's just all kind of mixed people. And I appreciate what Ashlee said about Karen kind of pulling her into this experience, because that's exactly what she did with me. And it's what she continues to keep doing with me in my life, and getting me to like have these conversations with other people and kind of think about these things more. So yeah, I'm on this call to share my experience, which I'm sure is as unique as everyone else's here. I'm here to broaden my mind about my life and kind of help myself realize that I do know more mixed people than like I ever would have thought about before. Like, it's just wonderful to remember that all of the people that I've ever met like have such diverse backgrounds, and they all come from different places, and they've all helped shape me to be this person that's sitting here on this screen right now. And to see all of you here, and I want to learn about all of your experiences too, because they will add to mine. And then we'll all just have one big, beautiful experience. And a final reason was really just to see some people that I missed really bad, or get to interact with them. I pulled one of my friends who isn't even like a part of any of these communities. I'm not going to call them out right now, but he knows who he is, and I'm so happy that he's here. And then there's another friend on here who I didn't even expect to be on here. So I'm just super excited and happy to see all of you alive people.
Thank you, Harris. And I appreciate you getting the word out and getting more people here. That's fantastic. I feel like, you know, what you're talking about with the diversity of our experiences and diversity of the way that we identify ourselves is a great segue to our first question. And before I ask it, I just want to note again that if anybody has any questions that either you want to speak up on chime in and have your voice in the room and ask the question, you are welcome to do that. If you are more comfortable dropping a question in the chat, you are more than welcome to do that as well. And this first question is kind of long. It came from Facebook and I cut it down. So basically I posted a blog about my experience this week around, I felt as if I've seen a lot of basically hate speech towards mixed race people this week after the Meghan Markle interview. And I want to get into that later, but somebody asked me this question on Facebook that I didn't want to respond to in a Facebook status. I wasn't going to type an answer, but I said that I would address it here. So I cut it down a bit, but basically her question was about how everybody technically is mixed race. If we did a DNA sample that most of us are mixed race, especially as Americans. So she was asking this question of why do we even feel the need to highlight the existence of a multiracial identity when all of us technically are multiracial? I'm throwing this out to y'all. Ashlee, Sydney, Harris, which one of you, is any of you interested in weighing in? And if so, what would you like to say?
Okay, so that's kind of amazing that you brought that up, because I just started reading this book. Now, I have a book recommendation. Who'd have thought? It's called Sex and Race. Negro Caucasian mixing in all ages and all lands. What? And it's exactly what you were just talking about. How there's no pure like race, and this whole idea of race is something totally that, I mean, just like everything else, we made it up, you know? And it's something that is really just causing way more friction than it ever needed to. And I think that, like, man, it's just like really upsetting, like how long this whole idea of there being one pure person, because it's just not real based on like the decisions that all of our ancestors have made. There's no one line of history for any one person, one group of people. It's like every group of people has intermingled and like met with everyone else, like since we started walking on two legs, you know? And I think that's kind of just amazing.
All right, Sydney or Ashlee. Ashlee, you're already unmuted, ready to go.
Yeah, so I also just want to just say, you know, in the context of the United States, of course, there are historical implications of white and black and what that means to be mixed white and black. And my experience has been very different because my parents are from Trinidad, but they're a both very different ethnic backgrounds, and there are a lot of ethnic tensions between Black and Indian folks within Trinidad. So I think when we talk about mixed identity, and for so long growing up in the United States, I didn't know that I was mixed heritage, although I had those conflicting identities, because it was distilled to white and Black. And I think that experience within the American context is of course like very complicated and very, I imagine people battle a lot with those identities, but in the context of Trinidad, it has been really interesting to come from two different communities with two very different religious affiliations. So I think it's really interesting to also be able to expose myself to other people that have those conflicting identities that aren't necessarily like associated with the mixed experience. So I do think that like it's just interesting to like add a little bit more different dynamics to that conversation.
I hear you. Sydney, do you want to weigh in on this?
It's actually funny because I saw a tweet that was talking about how we don't talk about how mixed kids either experience racism from both sides of their family and how some of them end up having like an identity crisis. Just the synchronicity of everything leading up to this has been really mind-blowing to me. And I saw that and I thought about it and I reflected on myself because I grew up in a primarily like white town. I still live here and I have a white dad who's also Jewish that denies that he's Jewish, and then a Black mom. And then with that dynamic, I've just grown up very whitewashed, but knowing that I look different, but not knowing why I look different. And I'm like, people point it out and I'm like, what? And I've realized that I had an identity crisis all throughout high school because I was ashamed of how I looked. People were making me feel bad about my hair because everyone had straight hair. I damaged the shit out of my hair. And I was like, why did I do that? And then I realized that I was trying to blend in with something that I wasn't fully, if that makes sense. And then I realized that I kind of didn't have a place. And being in Temecula, there's not a big mixed community. And so that made me feel like I either have to be really white, or if I want to tune in to like the Black side of me, I stand out and I'm not accepted. So it's just with all of that, I've just kind of got used to just kind of being by myself, if that makes sense with it, because it's just so complex. And then when you think about DNA tests, they always come back and you're 2% something that you never expected to be. And it's like, wait a second, that makes you think, yeah, we're not purely white, we're not purely Black, we're not purely something, but we don't talk about that much.
I hear what you're saying. My wife just discovered that she's 2% Filipino. So I am with you on that. For me, Sydney and Ashlee, I really resonate with how the two of you talked about that concept of identity crisis of growing up with two different cultures. And that to me is the big difference. You know, it doesn't matter what the DNA test, what matters is what my personal experience is. And what my experience has been is I grew up with a white father, a Black mother, and grew up in also a predominantly white neighborhood like you, Sydney. And so being a person of color in a predominantly white neighborhood is already one experience of complication. But because I wasn't 100% Black, I wasn't fully accepted by the few Black people that I came into contact with. And it wasn't as if I walked up to people and said, hi, my name is Karen and I'm mixed race. I never said anything like that. And I never understood, I don't even know what it is, how it was that little Black girls were able to look at me and just know. It was the first sentence. Whenever I'd meet a new little Black girl at school, she would say, you mixed, ain't you? It was like the sentence that was just like that. You mixed, ain't you? And I was like, yes. So it was just like, I couldn't hide it. But at the same time, white people never knew that I was mixed by looking at me. My wife, when I met her, Black woman, did not know that I was mixed by looking at me. And when we went to New York, my very first time that I met my mother-in-law, although obviously I didn't just elope Ronnie and meet my mother-in-law when we were married. We'd been dating for a few months and we met in New York, and she had a friend with her, and her friend said to me, oh, you're mixed race, aren't you? And Ronnie said, how do people just know this about you? Certain Black women just do. And I don't, and I say Black women. No Black man has ever said to me, hey, you mixed, ain't you? I don't know what it is this was just what my experience was. And so what that meant for me is it felt like I never fit in. I was treated like the Black girl in the white spaces that I was in, and I was too white in Black spaces and too Black in white spaces. And so it's not that I decided that I wanted to have an identity crisis. It was just the challenge that came with the experience. So my next question, speaking of challenges, is what would you describe as your experience being the challenges and also the benefits of being mixed race?
Well, I can start again. I actually wanted to talk about that idea of identity and just my own personal experience. For me, it's like the opposite of Karen, kind of. My mother is white and my father is Black. Honestly, I was thinking about this earlier today, but I think that my experience like in this life would have been completely different if my father was white. And speaking to how people kind of just know that you're mixed, especially Black people, is I think that it comes, this is just my theory. I think that it comes from the way that you speak, and like the first things that you kind of try and talk about with the person reveal a lot about you. And for people who might have grown up in an environment that has more Black people, it would be different than what I would say. And I grew up in the valley, like the San Fernando Valley of Los Angeles, which is a melting pot. Like there are white folks here. I feel like I see more Hispanic folk than white folk. There are like Japanese people here, there are Korean people here, there are Filipino people here. Like I went to school with all these kinds of people. And so for one thing, I never had like a tribe of dark-skinned people who looked like me. And I think that that could have been a challenge for finding my identity, especially growing up in the spaces that I grew up in. I mean, like CSL is predominantly white. Like we just got to be honest, you know.
CSL
and going to
spiritual living, just so y'all know, those of you who are not CSL people, CSL is the Centers for Spiritual Living, where I became a minister through. Sydney is from the Centers for Spiritual Living, and Harris is from there as well, which is why he said CSL real quick. Sorry, go ahead, Harris.
Yes, no, thank you for clarifying that actually. But the CSL organization has a teen camp that's affiliated with it. And like Karen said before, at the summer camps, there are around 300 teenagers that show up to this event on average, or at least like, you know, before the pandemic and whatever. At winter camps where Karen and I actually met and talked for the first time, it was more like 130, but still in those communities, it's predominantly white. Both the advisors and the teen population. The advisors are like the adults, you know, because you can't just have a camp full of underage people. But one of the challenges that I faced mostly in middle school was this idea of being whitewashed. For one thing, I was never like very good at basketball. So, and middle school had a much wider like range of people. There was a definite like crowd of Black people who all knew each other, and they kind of like dispersed into everywhere else because it was Northridge, Los Angeles. So they kind of found their tribe. I did that in the mixed community of the marching band. It's very lucky for me that I got some of my own people in there. But this idea of whitewash, of being whitewashed, is like, it's crazy because people will, and this is true of like anybody. It doesn't totally matter if you're mixed, even though I guess we've kind of established that everybody is just a little bit mixed. but people will just decide what your identity is for you. And so when I was in middle school, I wasn't sure if I was like supposed to just cater to that, or if I was supposed to try and dig myself out of this hole that I found myself in. And that was seriously a bummer. But I discovered through camp that it doesn't matter what I look like, because it's all about how you treat people. And so I decided, from around that age, I was very fortunate to grow up in CSL, which is a very like open-minded community. But I decided from that age that I didn't want to identify people like that. And so I think that one of the benefits of being mixed that I've encountered is that I continue to bring mixed people to me, and I continue to create my own like little diverse communities. And sometimes they're totally happenstance, and sometimes they come together through an amazing friend like this. And so I'm just really grateful for who I am, because or at least where my blood comes from, because it's given me this opportunity to see things as more than black and white. Just to be corny.
I hear you. Thank you, Harris. And want to remind everybody that the question that's being asked is, what are the challenges and benefits of being mixed race? And if there are other mixed race people in the room that are not technically panelists, feel free to jump in, weigh in if you have thoughts. And also feel free to jump in with additional questions or throw them in the chat as well. Sydney, you look like you unmuted yourself and you're ready to weigh in.
No, I did. So I relate a lot to Harris. So for me, and this is always going to be funny to me, I was the only Black kid at my high school. And it's always going to be funny to me because of how I look, because I don't look Black, and I've always known that. And so being in a predominantly white school, whenever we would do Black History Month or anything, and also being Jewish, when we talk about Black History Month and anything in history, I'd always be the elephant in the room. And I never understood it. I was like, I don't get it. I was fortunate to have a Jewish friend as well that was like, this doesn't seem right. So it kind of helped me to get in tune with that side of myself as well. But with being how I looked, people didn't know what I was. They thought I was exotic looking. I've heard that forever. And so when my mom would pick me up from school, people were like, oh my God, you're Black. And I was like, okay, what's your point? Like, why does this need to matter? And so I had friends, they were all white, and they chose me as their token Black friend. I never knew what that was. So we would hang out and they would say the N-word all the time. And I was like, I know that's not right though. It's like, I know that's not right. And they were like, but it's okay because you're Black. And I was like, what is that? And I remember this so vividly. We were walking down the street and the whitest of my friends said it. And there were these two big Black guys and they heard him say that. And they're like, no, it's okay because she's Black. And I was like, listen, I don't think this is right. And I was like, I shouldn't have to like take this on. So I told my mom and she was like, oh, you're their token Black friend. She's like, but that's weird though. And I was like, I know it's weird. And so I always became everyone's token Black friend. And that made me feel like, is that all I am to people? Is that all I am to anyone? And I've still experienced that even like last year and even years before that. And so for me, but then when I would meet other Black people, I was this little white girl that was trying to be Black. So I was like, I don't know where I fall in. And so it's funny because I had a conversation with my cousin last week and we all look like me. We're all mixed. We all look weird, different, whatever, beautiful, but just we don't look like anything. And so she had done a paper on mulattoes and we're talking about that. And I was like, it's kind of disgusting to actually see that in front of you and realize that people fetishize you and that they call us exotic and that this is what we are. We're just like this object to objectify and fetishize and use as like their token Black friend. And I've had someone say to me, well, I can't be racist because I'm friends with you. And I was like, that doesn't even make any sense to me as well. And I think what the benefit of being who I am, I feel like since I look how I look, I've been able to use my very, very, very light skin exterior for good, because people don't always buy it. So people think I'm an ally a lot of the times, and people are more willing to listen to me, and they don't understand my anger. Because even though I look like this, hearing what my mom's side of the family grew up with, I'm like, I understand the Black experience, but I don't understand it. Sydney doesn't, but I understand what that's like. And I also grew up having a very racist father who also like hates Jews, which is also really mind blowing to me. So I've had to just kind of find myself like last year and be okay and accept the fact that I'm not trying to culturally appropriate anything. I'm trying to like find little nuggets of myself that I've lost for the past like 22 years. So I guess the benefit is that I'm accepting who I am, how I look, and everything. And I'm still unfolding so many things. There's just a lot to unfold because there's so many pieces. But I'm enjoying it, and it's been really nice, but been a lot of reflection.
I hear you. Thanks, Sydney. Ashley, do you want to weigh in on this? Challenges and benefits.
Sure. So, in terms of challenges, I think that when I was growing up, it was always really difficult to kind of quantify what I was in different categories on the little boxes. There was one point in my life where I had no idea what I was, and I said Pacific Islander, not knowing anything. Like, I thought I was from the island, so I had no conception of how to actually like describe what I was. And I think growing up, I grew up in Boston, and then as soon as I grew up outside of Boston, when I was about like when I was maybe in third grade, I moved outside to the suburbs. It was a predominantly white community. I was trying to find what like kind of made me lay low the most in terms of like not stand out. And as soon as I went to college and I really understood my identity, and I was around more people that were first generation born here, or more people that were Black, more people that were Indian, I was able to also join like affinity groups that were like the Asian group and the Black group. And so I was able to actually go into those spaces and talk to people that I could relate to, and also bring more of a perspective. So even at CAA, I'm a part of the leadership of our Black affinity group. I'm also part of the leadership of our Asian affinity group. And I think even when you think about Asians, you think of East Asians, and I kind of show a more South Asian perspective there. So I think the benefits have been being able to empathize with people that don't necessarily fit in, and bringing that perspective. And I think also just being able to show people that, you know, even on the forefront, there's a lot of everyone's experiences vary, and their backgrounds socioeconomically vary. So I've been really, really thankful that I've been able to actually have a voice to help with the programming to build more cultural competency in the spaces I work.
Great. So I feel like the theme that I've heard from all of you, and I agree with you as well, is that having the opportunity to look at our identity makes it so that we're not just blindly taking on the cultural values that have been passed on, but it's both a blessing to have an opportunity to explore who we are individually, that it's a blessing and a curse. We all have the challenge of facing things from things happening out in the world, from learning about ourselves and experiencing a sort of identity challenge that some people may not deal with in that same way. But at the same time, we have that opportunity to really explore who we are and not live, you know, the way I was writing about this idea, but this concept that culture is like water. So if you're a fish, you don't notice the fact that you're living in water. But if you're a human swimming in water, you absolutely know that you're in water, and you understand that water exists. So we have this opportunity kind of to be amphibious, you know, to be underwater and be on land, and recognize the power and the freedom to be a part of different spaces, but also recognize that the value of looking at our identity doesn't give us a pass of I am owning the fact that we are the token Black friend, like just really recognizing that each one of us has a responsibility to do this work for ourselves and to also create spaces for others to do the same, which is, I think, what inspired me to invite the three of you here, because you all are doing that work. And I find that mixed race people have a tendency to do that. There was a line in the show Mixed-ish on ABC where Aunt Dee Dee says, "Do all mulattoes want to change the world?" And I feel like it's that concept of, because we don't fit in, it's as if we want to help create the world, make the world a place where everybody does feel like they fit in, and recognize that everyone is welcome. And that's the whole concept behind Spirit Uncensored. The fact that, as Harris said, I felt like the Centers for Spiritual Living was a predominantly white space, and I didn't feel welcome in a lot of these predominantly white spaces. And so I kind of had to create a monthly spiritual event so that I felt like I had some kind of spiritual community that served my needs, because there wasn't one in Los Angeles. So speaking of the Centers for Spiritual Living, there was a specific question about teen camp that I cannot fully answer because I am not on the leadership team for teen camp, but Reverend Connie of Tibbetts-Milner has served on the leadership team, and she is here. So I'm going to ask if she is comfortable. If you are not comfortable answering this question, feel free not to. But Reverend Connie, are you comfortable asking this question of if there's any shifts, movements that has been happening from teen camp to help bring awareness and healing around racism and create safety for Black folks at teen camp?
I will answer it this way. There are shifts. Some shifts larger than others, some shifts smaller than others. The very first inklings of making these shifts is to start introducing the advisorship in diversity types of training, not so much diversity, but just understanding the different cultures. There's understanding that there are different cultures, that there is more to know than what we've had in front of us the whole time. Can it be stronger? Sure, yeah, absolutely. I'd like to see us take bigger steps. But at this point, I will say that there are some shifts going on, and I think it's steering in the right direction to make bigger steps and take bigger shifts.
Fantastic. I appreciate you answering that, and I'm happy to hear that. Camille had a follow-up question about what maybe Harris, Sydney, you both can weigh in on this as well, of what would we love to experience as being advisors of color and creating and enjoying a space that upholds fullness of everybody's experience and heritages. While I was at that winter teen camp and noted just that feeling of being one of the few Black folks there, and there were other advisors that were coming to speak to me saying, "Hey, can you talk to this Black kid? Because I don't think we've never had a Black advisor before. I think I might have been the first Black advisor that they had in some time." So people took advantage of the fact that I was there and I was present. And I had a conversation with the leadership team, and the leadership team said that the teens are the ones who are in charge of creating the teen camp. They're the one who build it and decide the workshops. And so what I suggested was that there was a emphasis on including a workshop about identity. It feels like teenagers, of course, like everybody has an opportunity to really explore who they are. Just like I said, with the value of being mixed race meant that we were each given the gift to look at our identities in a way that most people don't have that privilege of doing. So creating a workshop or an event or some sort of experience that is dedicated to addressing the issue, discussing identity, that would have been something that I would have liked to see. So that's what I suggested. Sydney or Harris, anything that you both would like to add from your experience at teen camp?
I was actually also thinking about this earlier today, and just because every Spirit Uncensored event always just permeates into all aspects of my life. But geez, what I would really like is for a camp event, maybe like a camp-wide camp event, and for those of you, which I actually assume is probably most of you on this call, who've never been to camp, there's usually a night called Empowerment Night, where you do a workshop that really you want to focus on, that takes you inside of yourself and gives you a clear view of an aspect of yourself that you didn't really know was empowering before. At least that's my take on it now after experiencing it for like 10 plus years. And something that I would really like is for there to be a kind of empowerment night that is more focused on race, ethnicity, identity. In the past, there have been big focuses on gender identity and sexual identity. I remember once there was one empowerment night when they tried to breach that wall of ethnicity, and it really did not go that well. What I really want is for an experience for teens and adults that, specifically in that space though, the teen camp space, which is predominantly white, I want there to be that kind of ethnic empowerment that doesn't fetishize any one group of people, because that's what I feel like the biggest danger is in that environment, is that especially with like the kind of cultural saturation that goes on, like with social media and how that affects younger minds, like it can become all about one aspect of somebody's identity, which is like not what you want in an empowerment experience. You want the whole being to be empowered by this one aspect of their person. So I definitely agree that the adult leadership who help run workshop planning can like push a little harder in that direction of like inclusion of ideas, because a lot of camp is dedicated to like just really personal struggles that everyone goes through. And that's the biggest part of camp to me, is that it truly is about an individual's spiritual awakening. And that I know that for me, it didn't really have to do with what I looked like. I just had to be comfortable. I had to discover how to be comfortable with like being myself. I know that that's definitely attached to what I look like and where I came from, who I was raised by. But that wasn't all that it was for me. It wasn't about how I looked. It was just about being comfortable with like saying weird things and like asking a lot of questions and like being able to talk for a long time and singing at random times. Like, you know, it was just that kind of stuff. Like that's what I was at camp for. But I do think that this idea of ethnicity could be delved into more, especially in teenagers' minds. Because that's where the world grows from, you know, they have all their ideals in there. And so what we really have to do is hype up those ideals that go together with unity and community, no matter what you look like, no matter where you came from.
I also want to add that Tracy Brown put another book recommendation in the chat, Gray Boy, Finding Blackness in a White World by Cole Brown. Reverend Connie also added, I am empowered by everything I am. I so totally agree that our community needs to be able to not only identify, but see how we are able to step forward as we are without fear or diminishment or shame about something that is naturally inherent in our DNA. I appreciate you adding that, Reverend Connie. We're coming up to our last 10 minutes, and I want to get to this Meghan Markle question. And I will say right now, I did not watch this interview. I don't pay attention to the royals. I have never cared about the royals. But what occurred for me after this Meghan Markle interview is I started seeing a lot of people post anti-mixed race content on Facebook, and people who I wouldn't say that they were my best friends, but people who I know, people who are in my life, really bashing mixed race people. And me talking about this experience of the civil rights revolution, I felt like back in May of 2020, I started seeing white people post things about Black folks that was really difficult and hard for me to read. And then I had this other element of now reading, knowing what certain people in my life feel about mixed race people. What that has looked like for me is it's been the Black people in my life. In my experience growing up, Black people were the ones who were hardest on me. And I don't criticize Black folks for that, because I recognize that all of this is due to colorism. I recognize that all of this goes all the way back to slavery, when the lighter skinned mixed race Black people got to work in the house and the darker skinned full Black people worked in the field, and it created this resentment, and there was an intentionality behind that. And so this conversation that we're having about race is giving us an opportunity to heal our country's challenges with colorism and to heal the Black community's relationship towards light-skinned people and biracial people. So I wanted to invite all of you who have either seen the interview or not seen the interview. Have any of you been impacted by this interview taking place over the course of last week? Was it just me? I was the only one who had, I am on Facebook a lot. And Harris, I know you're never on Facebook. So, and I know, Sydney, you're not on it much either, and Ashlee's not on it either. So there's a reason that I know that this is, because this is what makes Facebook hard. This is what's made this experience of this civil rights revolution hard, is when you're reading these things from specifically, and Ashlee Hypolite mentioned this earlier, of having families that have different perspectives, different viewpoints, and my white family members have been very vocal of posting things that I feel like are anti-Black. They are anti Colin Kaepernick kneeling. They are against the Confederate statues being removed. I had one uncle specifically say that systemic racism ended 55 years ago. So I've had some real challenges with the white side of my family, and specifically my dad, that I didn't expect, that after being married to a Black woman for 25 years, that he would be somebody that would be against tearing down Confederate statues and be against Harriet Tubman being on the $20 bill. I didn't see any of that coming. So it's confronted some challenges with them. But I'm guessing by your faces that like none of you are on Facebook for a reason. Like you don't want to see any of this bullshit. You want to be able to live from a place of peace, not know anything about this interview, and live from a place of peace. That's what that Harris dance is all about. So we've got 5 minutes left. Is there anything anyone would like to add to this conversation before we pray out?
I wanted to just say real quick, I did watch the interview, the whole thing, just because, I don't know, I just wanted to watch the whole thing. And the thing that I realized, and Karen, you and I've had kind of this discussion before, I didn't realize that being a mixed race was a problem till I became an adult. I was bullied as a kid because I wasn't brown enough for my brown neighborhood friends. And when I went to school, I wasn't white enough for the white neighborhood kids. So I kind of had to play by myself or play with my brothers. And that just seemed like that was my norm. That was what we did, and it was okay. So I didn't realize that that was a problem till I became an adult. And when I watched the interview with Oprah and Meghan Markle, it wasn't so much that I was impacted by what she said, was that it came up, that it was all of a sudden an issue on main, TV, on mainstream TV, that all of a sudden we're talking about having mixed races and the challenges that came with that. And it did bring up some bleeds and some stingies and things like that. But more than that, for me, it brought up this, this fresh air to breathe. This new space to be able to speak into it. Now, I fully pass and benefit from white privilege because I seem to have grown out of that ethnicity I started out in. And it's neither good nor bad, it's just where I am. But the ability to be able to talk to people who told me before that I wasn't allowed to cop to the brown side because I didn't look it enough, and be able to talk about the different challenges that came up from that, has really helped me to be able to be more open to both sides of the questions. Thank
you, Connie. I appreciate you bringing your voice into the room. Connie, I I strongly considered having Connie on our panel, so I'm glad that she showed up anyway, especially because she was here to answer that teen camp question that I did not have the answer for. Also want to thank Sydney and Harris and Ashlee for joining and participating in this discussion, and grateful for all of you who are open to expand your awareness and your understanding of this mixed race experience. Just as an FYI, I mentioned at the very top of this event that Spirit Uncensored events are generally on the second Sunday. Next April, Audra will be leading our second Sunday, our Sunday Night Live experience. She will be talking about leaping into the unknown. Audra, did you want to say something? Don't feel, no pressure if you do not feel so inspired to. All right. No, she's got no audio or something. So that's Audra is on the screen, but she will be leading that event in April on the second Sunday by Connie. And the May event will be on the third Sunday because the second Sunday is Mother's Day and we didn't want to do a virtual event on Mother's Day. So the May event will be about, we'll have a multicultural interfaith panel. Will be a sort of discussion, follow-up discussion from our African American History Month discussion, because those interfaith leaders were really excited and engaged. So we want to have another opportunity for them to connect. So you can find all information about upcoming Spirit Uncensored events on our website at spirituncensored.org. And also want to invite you to make a donation to support us in being able to continue to hold and facilitate these kinds of discussions. If you do not feel inspired to donate, another way that you can support Spirit Uncensored is by subscribing to our YouTube channel. And if you are coming into this late, you can check out, I will be posting this on YouTube over the course of this next week. So look out for that if you missed it and want to see the beginning of this conversation. But becoming a subscriber helps us be able to be youtube.com/Spirit Uncensored. Right now we're youtube.com/ you can look in your chat, it's UC6R, a whole bunch of stuff that's not helpful for any of us. So if you become a subscriber, you help us get to that 100 mark so that we can have it, that name be /Spirit Uncensored. So there's nothing else. I will pray us out. Anything else anyone wants to add before I pray us out? Fantastic. All right. So I invite us all once again to get comfortable in our space, wherever we are, bringing up our own understanding of what spirit is, recognizing that our own understanding is the perfect understanding for us. Grateful for each one of us who has chosen to contribute to our energy to this discussion, whether it was a passive observer and listening and receiving and applying this information and this wisdom as we move forward, whether it was actively engaging and contributing to the discussion. Whatever it is that we did, I know that it was the right and perfect experience for each one of us. I am so grateful for the opportunity to have led this discussion, grateful for the shift that takes place in my life, for the opportunity to lean into this healing experience for myself, knowing that each one of us as Americans or maybe as non-Americans, wherever we are in the world, are contributing to an experience of racial healing on the planet. And I am so grateful to know this, grateful to speak this, grateful to allow it to be so, as I invite us to close this prayer with whatever word or phrase resonates with us, as I choose to close by saying, and so it is. So
it is. I'll share.
Somebody just said Constance keeps raising her hand, and I missed that, and I apologize.
It's okay.
So I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. The moment has passed. It's fine.
Okay, I apologize. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
Love you guys. Thank you for holding the space. Sorry, I took a freaking nap and my alarm never went off. So I guess my body needed more sleep than I thought it did. Love you guys.
Love you. Thank you for coming.
Mom, I'm curious what you were going to say.
What I was going to say, or what
She left. That was my mom who was raising her hand.
I'm curious. Heather, and how did you find us?
I actually found Ahaya through Meetup.
Ahaya, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been going to the Sunday celebrations and the healing circles on Wednesdays, and then the Tuesday Rev Scott meeting or class as well.
Great.
And
Well,
yeah, I'm just
see you there.
really enjoying everything. It's been great.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah, thanks for really insightful talk. I appreciate your time.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hey,
How are you?
okay. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, I'm fine. How are you?
Good.
This was phenomenal.
Great. That's a wonderful word.
Yeah.
Oh, let me stop.